Today, we're here with Chris Hildebrand from the Acceleration Triathlon Club in Vancouver, BC. Chris is an experienced coach with 32 years on deck in both swimming and triathlon. He's been at the Acceleration Triathlon Club for the last 14 years. And today, we're here to talk to him about his philosophy behind why he does what he does and his training. So we welcome Chris.
Thanks, Jason.
Hey, Chris. How you doing?
Very good.
Good. So thanks for making some time today. That's truly appreciated. I know, like, as with everybody else, you're in the midst of making so many dynamic decisions in terms of how your program runs and what you're doing and whatnot. So I really appreciate that. And certainly a couple of days before the holidays here. So thanks. So I want to dive into Chris, the coach, because you run a really cool organization in Vancouver called the Acceleration Triathlon Club. It's been around for quite a while. Now, I know that you and your wife started it originally. Is she still involved with it?
Yeah, she actually started it, and then I came on board about 8 years into the club. So right now, 6 years into the club.
Sounds good. And like her background is in triathlon, yours was in swimming, or at that point were you both in triathlon?
At that point, we were both, like, when I came on board, I was in triathlon also. I'd been coaching with the National Center in Winnipeg. Then I moved out here and met her. She is a I guess pseudo-famous triathlete in Canada. She was the captain of the national team for about 2-3 years in the 90s, and she traveled the world a bunch and won a couple medals in duathlon, like world duathlon medals. So she's the big triathlete person. And then she did this she started the club as a what do you call it, a master's thesis as a challenge. She was in Calgary. They challenged them to enact their thesis. So she did, and 21 years later, we're still going with Acceleration.
Well, that's awesome. So you mentioned Winnipeg, and that's where kind of your story begins, because you were a very high level swimmer in Winnipeg, moved into coaching, started a business in Winnipeg, and life kind of slowly dragged you out west. So who did you swim with in Winnipeg?
I was with the Marlins, and then U of M, University of Manitoba.
Sounds good. And how was your university swimming experience?
It was mediocre. Like, I didn't really improve through my years of university, but there again, like, I used swimming as a outlet for engineering, because that's my background is engineering. So it was, when you're got a full course load and you're studying a lot, you need an outlet, and swimming was an outlet. So, I wasn't eating well, I wasn't sleeping well, I was just surviving for a lot of it, and that's not conducive to fast swimming. But it's good to get through engineering. So, and I did well with it. So,
well, that's interesting, because I know, like, based on your philosophy, a lot of that appears, like those sentiments, those words appear in your philosophy in terms of how you feel sport can benefit youth, and the philosophy behind your program in terms of creating balance, and using it as an opportunity, and so on and so forth. And I would imagine as well, your background as an engineer certainly must help you with the technical aspects of kinetic energy, movement, so on and so forth. So
yeah, I'm not afraid of the math is really what it comes down to. It's not a big deal to open a book on biomechanics or pacing or energy systems. The math and the technical jargon never scared me, which is I guess pretty good, because a lot of coaches, I think, get scared by that.
Yeah, fair enough. And then how? Talk to me a little bit about you talk about balance and creating the right environment, because pathways for everybody in this sport are different. And you've mentioned before, nobody, or the chances of getting a really big payday out of the sport are few and far between. So it has to be about more than just that.
Well, and I think, a lot of this comes back to, I love triathlon for the fact that it's cradle to grave, right? You can literally start at 0 years old and you can go until you are no longer there. So it's a sport that has many avenues for an athlete. Um, so they can start off in a competitive side and move to less competitive, or vice versa. But really, at the end of the day, um, as parents, we don't put our kids in sport for them to make the Olympics. Because if we did, and some maybe you know what, maybe I'm wrong. Some people may do that, but the reality is, so few people actually go on to high levels of sport. There's so many barriers and various lucky kind of coincidences that have to happen for you to get to those levels. That if that's your goal, then it's like buying a lot of lottery tickets to win the lottery. That's not the best way to become a millionaire. The best way to become a millionaire or be successful is to develop the habits that are required to be a millionaire. You need to be pseudo frugal, or you have to understand money. You have to have good work ethics. You have to have drive. You have to have the ability to plan out. You have to have the ability to, get scared and move through that. Those are all things you learn in sport. There's a reason why a lot of the top, successful people on the planet were in sport at some level, and often reasonably high levels they attain before something else pulled them away, or they realized that was the highest level they're going to make for their ability. So they moved into another area and then found out that, hey, this sport thing really helped me. It taught me diligence. It taught me how to get up early in the morning and go, or do things even when I'm tired, or even just the idea that, yes, I can plan something and set a goal and attain it. So that's, in my mind, that's the real value of sport. That's our value of sport to a society and to kids. So if that's the real value of sport, well, that should be included in your sports program. And then we put that front and center. Like that's we talk about that constantly with the kids.
That's brilliant. And how much of that conversation trickles down or is also had with parents? Is that something that is a
constant? Yeah. That's part of the indoctrination process, for lack of a better word. But yeah, and I think most parents get it. Like for most athletes, and maybe it's different in in the kids that we attract, but most parents get the concept that the kid's job is school. Like that's 99.9% of their future is how well they do in school. Um, this is a hobby that is going to teach them a lot and is going to help them, but the hobby itself is probably not going to give them a career. What they learn from that hobby is going to give them a career, or give them a future. And so given that, like, you have to always put school first. But I also recognize, and this is one of those things that you have to help with parents a lot, is yes, school is first, but you can't neglect other things. Like, so if you become mono-focused on school, kids often do worse. If they're not busy enough, then they're going to fill their time with other things, and those other things may or may not be beneficial to them. And sport gives you friends. It gives you an outlet for your studies and all the stresses that you're dealing with, and it gives you something to do. Which I'll be honest, like looking at the COVID situation going on, I'm constantly seeing large groupings of teenagers gathering together, vaping and stuff, which is not unusual. It's the fact that because they have no place to go now, they're doing this in bucketing rain at -1 degrees. Like, it's 0 degrees. It's ugly out. Like we're not running outdoor run practices because the kids will get sick, and these kids are out hanging with their friends because it's important. It's a stress relief. It's something they need to do. In a society, we need to have sports. We need to have outlets for these kids, and we're one of the outlets. So that and it's I think it's important as a coach to understand your place in society, in the world, and where you can add most value.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And from my experience, because our daughter's been, she's participated in some of your events before, and she absolutely loved it. And it's just such a welcoming atmosphere when kids come in, and like, not that there's no expectation, but the expectation is that they enjoy themselves. That's the first thing. That's what I took away from it. But I mean, to add a little context, like our daughter was 5 when she participated in your first event, and I know that you deal with athletes, from all ages, and some relatively high level athletes as well. So, being where you're at, like in Templeton, in that area of Vancouver, where there's a wide variety of socio sort of economic situations and whatnot. Like I imagine from my experience, and I'm posing this question, I guess, through an experience, but you know, um, like you must see kids coming back to you, that could have gone down a pretty dark path, or gone down a pretty slippery slope, and say, "Hey, coach, thanks for that."
Um,
Um,
uh, Truthfully, in triathlon itself, I don't know if we see it that often. Mainly because we tend to attract more fringe, which means parents are more engaged with their kids. Um,
okay, interesting.
and the reason I say that is I've been involved with a downtown east side group. I spent 6 years in a group with a group called More Sports, and that's what we did. We put soccer and basketball and stuff on for inner city kids. And in that area, I definitely saw kids that if they didn't have sport, they went from being my number one best coach as they grew up in sport. And if they hadn't gone that direction, they probably would have been the number one best drug dealer in the neighborhood, right? They engage kids well. Now, and the reason I say that, like, because one of the fallacies that I found in more sports was the program is never the only thing. And we tend to get caught up in the, oh, I'm providing this and it's saving lives. It's like, no, you're providing something that acts as part of a net that catches kids that are falling out. And the example I often give is we had a skateboard program running at a school which appeals to kids that are not into mainstream sports. And we had a kid join us, and he turned out to be quite a good skateboarder and became a coach later on. And he was about grade 4, and the teacher came to me at the end of the program and said, "Hey, Seeger learned how to read because of your program." And you're like, skateboard doesn't teach reading, right? It doesn't. That's not what it does. She said, no. He loved skateboarding so much that I brought in skateboard magazines and we went through them and I taught him to read through those. Um, so and that's why I look at, like, yes, there's definitely kids in our world, but I don't think it's socioeconomic anymore. There's kids that are falling off the straight and narrow, or the better, more successful pathway, the easier pathway. Um, because there's not enough hooks for them to stay on the successful pathway. In triathlon or swimming or any of the other sports, it's a hook to keep a kid moving forward in a more successful pattern, more successful pathway. So it's not the hook, it's a hook. So in our sport, we tend to see parents that are fairly engaged, but I've definitely had kids that were exceedingly stressed or were starting. In fact, one of our best coaches, I talked with his mom when he was in grade 9 or 10, and she was saying he was falling in with the wrong crowd, right? Like his buddies were getting into the dope and they were getting into drinking and stuff, and he wasn't in the crowd yet, but he was just hanging out with them, because in around grade 9, 10, and 11, you start to figure out who you are, where you fit, and all the rest. And we were able to not intervene, but kind of change his mindset from being, I'm the dope kid, I'm the kid that parties all the time, to the kid who's, yeah, I go to parties with my friends, but I'm a triathlete, and triathletes need to sleep, and we can't drink all the time, we can't do this all the time. And that probably changed his trajectory. But and that's, so it wasn't the program. It was the program plus his parents, plus school, plus his friends that were in the program and outside the program that all combined to keep this kid moving in the good direction. Yeah, and so it's easy to say that, you know, we're part of the, you know, we're dealing with these kids and these kids would be drug dealers. It's hard to, but I will say knowing, and I think every program out there has the same pattern, right? One of the fallacies is, you know, just because you come from low income, in fact, low income kids have less access to drugs and alcohol. High income kids have massive drug and alcohol access, right? Like I have friends of mine who are social workers, you know, working in the downtown east side, and they talk about, yeah, kids in the downtown east side will go on a bender because they'll get $100 and they'll buy a bunch of alcohol and they'll bend it, go on a bender. And in West Van, kids will have a Friday night party and drop 10 grand on drugs and alcohol, right? Like it's a different world. So it's not just that we're in the area we're in. I think every sport has that ability to keep kids focused and moving in that good direction. That will, again, it's not that they can't come back into that world. It's just harder, right? It's not that you find yourself as a 26-year-old with a drinking habit. It's not that you can't come back to being a 27-year-old productive member of society who has kids and is moving forward, like stable. It's harder, right? So if you don't go down that path in the first place, it's an easier life that you have in the future. So, and that just follows our pattern with it. Our big challenge that we run into being in the area we are is we do recognize that there's people that can't access our program because they can't necessarily afford it. So we have a policy in our club that we have a policy in our club that basically says that if you can't afford it, talk to the board. We'll try to find you financial benefit because, you know, we still have to pay our coaches. But if worst comes to worst, like if everything fails and we can't find you outside financial help, you're in the club. Like we just say you're in. There's just no two ways about it because it's at the end of the day, you know, you don't get paid enough to coach. Like you really don't. You're never going to get value from it. So there has to be something else there. And for us, it's the fact that we'll never say no to a kid. Like if you want to be in our program, we will figure out how to get you in our program. And that's been a tenet that Christine and I have lived with, and it goes to our board. Our board follows it also. It's quite nice that way. So.
Wow, that was a really awesome answer. But it was really in depth and really well articulated. That was really good. Thanks for sharing all that experience. There's one thing I wanted to kind of go back to. You mentioned the function of sport and clubs as and you liken them to hooks in society that kind of keep kids on a pathway or, you know, corralled. I mean, I don't know how else to better say that. And you also mentioned that there are more and more kids slipping off of those hooks. Are we seeing programs not reaching enough kids? Are we not seeing enough programs? Are we seeing too many choices? Like, why do you think we're seeing kids?
Well, and again, I don't think that programs are there's any less participation in programs that have moved forward through the years. And again, that's a stats thing. But truthfully, I think the reason why we're seeing and I don't know if kids are falling off or kids are, you know, they're having a much harder time of it. You know, a lot of it because the people who are selling them the not so great stuff, the smoking, the drinking, vaping, drugs, they've become more mainstream, right? Like it's been you know, they become better at selling it. You know, like in BC here, marijuana is legal. Drinking is obviously still legal. Vaping is everywhere. Cigarettes are still legal. You know, now again, is it bad if you take a toke or two? No, it's not. Is it bad that you drink something or no, or even cigarette or something like that? Again, everything under moderation is fine. I guess to a degree. But you know, the idea that these kids though are being exposed to it younger and younger, and more so it's there's a permissiveness that's being more and more allowed, right? Like if you permit alcohol as a, or even you celebrate it, you tend to see more binge drinking and more alcoholism. If you don't go out of your way to celebrate it, then you don't see it as much. And our society seems to be celebrating that stuff, but more so, the advertising is just that much better nowadays. There's that much more things for kids to get distracted by, or video games to stay in the room for hours on end, and all the rest. Like those are getting better. They're the hooks that pull us off a successful pathway are getting larger and more numerous. So I just think we have to make sure that our hooks on the pathway are as good as, and that's just, it's like an arms race, and it's not a conscious arms race. It's not a there's no evil people out there. It's everyone's trying to make a living, but the reality is that's what's happening. But even if the world's getting better, like even if kids are getting better at this stuff, like taking the other argument, you're still doing good by keeping more kids engaged, right? Like it's not a negative thing for kids to be fit. In fact, it's a very positive thing. So yeah, either way, I think it's just a positive attribute to society.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it brings up, I guess, like a thought for me, and just in terms of, listening to what you're saying in terms of the hooks and all the distractions in society and the role of sport. From you mentioned fitness, which is a great segue into like leading a healthy lifestyle. And one of the things that you've talked about is the need to create that environment where you have great balance between all things that lead down that successful pathway, and so on and so forth. And it seems at a time where things are changing so fast. I mean, like you and I not to age myself or age you, but I think you might be a year or two older than I am. But we go back to a time where, like, best described, like we grew up in a little bit of an analog world. Like we weren't connected at the hip by a cell phone, right? And we could, we had to remember all the phone numbers, of the people in our circle, because like we didn't have a roaming phone book and roaming maps and all that stuff there. But at a certain point, like the acceleration of change, no pun intended, it took off at lightning speed. And now we're at a point where kids, if the kid doesn't like an answer the coach gives them or a teacher gives them or somebody else gives them, they can go to their phone and ask and get a different answer, and so on and so forth. So given those distractions and the need to create balance and balanced environment and so on and so forth, how like what are your tricks to keep your kids engaged, because you are really kind of fighting a battle against distraction and a battle for attention?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any tricks. I don't even know how well I do at this. Like our program is full, but every year I always have a kid that in fact, I got a phone call into a kid today. I got a call about him getting back more into the program.
That's great.
But part of it, like, so there's a couple things we value in our club, and one of the things we do is you don't have to be all in. You can be partially in. So when a kid signs up for a program, they sign up for maybe a single day, couple days, or they can sign up for the full week, or they can, even if they sign up for the full week, they don't necessarily come every day. And that's partly because, some kids are like, they can only commit to twice a week, 3 times a week. Some kids are doing soccer and volleyball and other things. So that's consuming them for parts of the week. So we only get them for a couple times. And that's one of the uniqueness of our program is we want kids to do other sports, but then we require them to be so busy with our sport that they can't do other sports. And they don't get to choose. It's either an in or out. Whereas we kind of said, well, as soon as you join one day, you're in, and then and then it just scales, right? Like, so if your goals are to be I got a couple of kids that want to win the elite series this year, right? They want to be top three. I've got about 3 kids in different age categories that want to do that. Well, that means I got to train. Got to train a bunch. So we sit down and we talk about that. Here's your training thing. Here's what you need. Here's all the stuff. And then there's other kids that they just want to be fit. Other kids just want to see improvement. Other kids just want to be able to go to these series and travel with triathlon. So it if your goal is to be a high elite athlete and you're training twice a week, it's not going to happen. So you're just honest with them, and they can go look that up on Google if they want. And you can, and then the other aspect too is if they're only wanting to be, I want to go to a couple races, I want to hang out, these are my friends, and they're required to be at 7 practices a week. That's burnout, right? I've always found that burnout is not how much you do, it's how much it's how much you're forced to do versus how much you want to do. So if you're a kid that likes to run every single day, and I've met a couple kids that their idea of fun is let's do a 10K run, just go run, right? And they'll do that every day, every second day, and it's not you're almost holding them back. In fact, at that level, you're trying to not let them do too much. They're not going to burn out. Doesn't matter what you give them, they're not burning out. But another kid who doesn't really want to be at practice, even once a week, will be a burnout because they don't want to be there, right? So so that's really where burnout comes from. And kids are extremely good at knowing how much is too much, right? Like when they get tired, what do? They sleep. When they get over fatigued, they don't want to do stuff, right? So if they're over fatigued and don't want to do stuff, well then why are you forcing them to do stuff? Their body's telling them something. They may not know what it's telling them, and that's a long-term education process, right? They're tired. Yep, you should be. We're working hard this week. That's an education process, and that's that's a learning to train process, and that you have to go through that stage, that level. It's not just do more. It's learn how to do more, and the end goal is for them to push themselves. Because at the highest level, it's not a coach pushing you. It's you pushing yourself, and the coach is aiding you along. So so that's what we set up, and given that, like at the end of the day, most people like exercise, right? People like to move. They feel good. They like their friends. They like doing healthy stuff. You feel better when you're healthy. So given that, it's actually, we don't have, it's the old adage, you don't, the staples in food, you don't advertise. You only advertise junk food, right? So that's the concept. So I don't know if we do a great job of it. We are full. Kids like to stay around. They like our program. We get a lot of kids becoming coaches in our program after. But at the end of the day, we're still trying to get better. Always trying to get better. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and like it sounds like you guys do a good job. I mean, given everything else and that's going on, and that inclusive mindset, like I've been around sports for a long time, and like my experience has told me that by giving people what they want, you're more likely going to keep them involved, right? Instead of telling them that everybody's got to fit a specific mold, do things a certain way, and so on and so forth. So that inclusive mindset's got to go a long way.
It's like there's more than one color of goggle. Weird.
Is that?
Yeah, it's just strange. There's different types of cars, and there's more than one color of goggle, and it's just weird that you want to give people what they want.
And like at the end of the day, I want to go back to something you just mentioned and have you just expand on it. I know that when there's like coaching is really an art when you're talking about dealing with people. So when you're talking about kids that are tired, like you mentioned that you have a few kids that have some very specific goals this year. And with those kids there, they get to a point where they're tired, and that's where the coaching really starts to kick in, when it's the difference between learning and knowing when to push through a ceiling or push through a barrier, and when to back off, and which one is when it's healthy to do that, and when you need to know, okay, we need to stop. So can you just kind of double click on that or expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So I use somewhat math. I use an RPE system, relative perceived exertion, that the kids fill out, and I do the calculations versus acute versus chronic training loads. But at the end of the day, like it, when they show up at practice and they start to move, and I know how the context of the practice is and everything else, you can quickly figure out if a kid is tired and if they should be tired, right? Like if you're in the middle of a build week and they need to be tired at this point because later on in the week they're going to be doing stuff under fatigue, then yeah, it's great that they're tired. You just don't want to get them. You're just watching for injury rates now. Whereas if you're in an unloading week, or you're in a week where you're trying for best times or records or whatever, or you're tapering down, peaking out with something, and they're tired, then you start backing off, right? You start kind of pulling back on stuff. I found it very strange. Like a lot of my triathlon like my other coaches, there's various groups around Canada that we kind of gather on Zoom and talk. And we were talking about the COVID experience, and I ended up through the COVID, where I was doing a lot of distance coaching, we ended up with more injury rates than when like higher injury rates than when I was coaching directly. And I enjoy direct coaching. I'm not a big fan of indirect coaching. Whereas all the other triathlon coaches across Canada that we were chatting with all had the reverse. They all had significantly less injury rates during when they were distance coaching, and then when they got into practice, they were higher injury rates. And when I was talking to them about it, it's like the comment was, well, they push much harder when like with me than they do on their own, and that's the exact opposite for me. Like I'm usually pulling my kids back because we set up an environment where success and push is the goal. It's not my job to push them. My job is to actually pull them back. So when we were distance coaching, they would, if I subscribed like a 40K bike or a 60K bike, they would regularly do 80 or 100K over just because this is fun. We're just going, hey, we're going to go longer today. We're going to do more. It's like, no, guys, you got to do less. It's not more. It's whereas at practice, I can see that, and it's like, no, you're not doing 8 of these. You're doing 6 of them. But coach, I want to do 8. No, 6 is all you get to do. But that comes back to just a basic kid psychology, right? Like if you put minimums in place, then people will do the minimum. If you put maximums in place, then people tend to want to do the maximum. We used to, when we used to run swim runs, which were we'd empty a school, like we'd get all the grades from kindergarten all the way to grade 6, and they would come in and they do a swim, and then they go out and do a run. Just a very simple thing. The swim, we quickly noticed that if we put, like the kids would ask, how many do I have to do? It's like, well, you're not allowed to do more than 5 laps in the pool, like 5 loops, because we put in the buoys and stuff. And you're only allowed to do 4 laps on the run, and that's more to do with time, right? Because the teachers want to get going, and every one of them will generally do more than their minimum. Like we used to have the minimum was 1, and they'd all do 2 or 3. And then you get about 20 to 30% of the kids that would be, haha, I did 6. I know you said 5, but I did 6. Ha ha ha. Right? And you're like, yeah, that was horrible how you did more exercise. Right? But that's human nature, right? Human nature is not the minimum is 1,500. The human nature is the maximum's 1,500. And as soon as you say it's the maximum, people are like, well, why can't I do more? Well, because this is all we want to do right now. But I want to do more. So that's a basic coaching philosophy, right? Like I never ever put minimums in place, right? You have to do this. It's like, I recommend you do a 20-minute run. You don't have to do it. You could do 0. You can sit on the couch and do nothing. You're not going to improve. You're not going to feel good. You're probably going to not be happy with the result. But 20-minute run is good. And then invariably they go in there and it's a 30-minute run. It's like, guys, maximum is 30 minutes. Right? So but that's so, and I guess I could take a pause and say, like, our club has three values, and it comes from Christine and myself. We've talked about these extensively, and it comes back to our coaching. The three values we value, the three things we value is inclusion, right? And everybody's included. Like, I don't care who you are, I'm going to coach you. If you show up fat, never done anything before in your life, I will figure out how to coach you. If you've got, and in fact, we just won an award as a club for inclusionary policy, because we have a bunch
Wow.
of kids that are in, it was a big Vancouver thing. It was like $5,000 though. It was kind of cool. Yes, money. Hey, but we won it because we have a bunch of kids with autism in our club, and we don't differentiate them. Like, they're not in their own little group. They're part of our main program. Because honestly, I don't see a difference between an autistic kid and a super high performing kid. They both have unique challenges that need to get met. The autistic child might need more visual, might need more different stuff. In fact, one of my autistic kids became world champion at one point, right, in triathlon age group. Right?
Wow, that's incredible.
Age group's a little different though, but still, like, yeah, it was because, again, what a high performing athlete and say an unfit athlete, they're both need something. They both have a deficiency somewhere. The high performance is they're not fast enough yet. The unfit, they're not fit enough yet, right? There are different strategies on how you get them to the next stage, but they're there. So we've always had the thing of, yeah, I'll coach anybody anytime, just show up. Now I prefer to coach teenagers, which is why the group I have. I just enjoy their energy and all the rest. But at the end of the day, I'll coach anybody with anything. It doesn't matter. So inclusion is huge in our club. Number two is respect, and we talk about respect in the way that I respect you as a human being, right? I respect your knowledge. I respect it. Like, I will never know you as an athlete as well as you as an athlete. Like, I'll never know that, right? Like, your brain is more connected to your body than I'll ever understand. So let's use that. Let's respect that. We also show respect to the kids. Like, it's amazing how, if you respect a teenager, how they respond, because they're not used to it. Like, I'm shocked at the way our society teaches or treats teenagers. They either treat them like children or they treat them like adults, and there's no in between. It's like they talk down to them, or they assume they just know stuff. And teenagers are insanely bright, but they just don't necessarily know things yet, right? They haven't experienced it. They haven't really understood that, right? Like, I laugh because my 14-year-old boy, who's like, I've got an engineering degree, he's teaching me math, right? Like, it's the stuff he's going into in math is just boggles my mind, and he just loves it. And at the same account, I'm talking to him about basic relationship stuff, how to ask a girl out on her first date, right? Like, so on the one hand, he's brilliant. On the other hand, it's like, what? You don't understand it, right? So, but that's a teenager. So, but that's showing respect, right? It's understanding where they fit. And then the last aspect is personal excellence. I don't, like, some kids will be swimming like because we understand swimming well. I've got kids in the same group. Some of them are swimming 2-minute 100 freestyles, and some of them are swimming 59-second 100 freestyles, right? In the same group, because they're the same age, they're friends, and they can coexist. They're in different lanes, and they get completely different sets, or they get a modified set on either side, and because you're given what they need at the time. But the kid who goes 2 minutes, who now drops to 145 because he works his butt off and he tries and he's focused and everything else, should be celebrated as much as the kid who goes 58 or breaks a minute for the first time, right? We got a kid who's just trying to break a minute for the first time. He's 0.2 off, right? So you're kind of looking, going, well, those should both be celebrated. Like, they're both accomplishments for them. But if the kid who supposed to go a minute and goes 102, well, I'm not going to celebrate that, even though it's significantly faster than the kid who went 158 instead of 2 minutes. So it's about hard work. It's about dedication. It's about this. And that's how you get personal excellence. And, So that's our club, and through that, we've seen some fairly high level performances. Like we've had some high stuff, and we just have more. Honestly, we've had more really cool people join our club, and I love our kids. Like I love the kids I coach. Like they're awesome people. They're people I want my kids to emulate. So, and that's what comes out of it. And that's just our three tenets. Like there's nothing else to it. Everything boils down to those three things.
Sorry, can you just go back and just call out the third one? I missed the
Oh, that's personal excellence.
personal excellence.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
inclusion,
So inclusion, respect, and personal excellence.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I
So
mean, and totally, like those three words totally respect or sum up everything that I know about you and your club, right? So that's really cool, and the fact that you continue to operate that way, and you have since day one, like, is pretty awesome. Like nothing's changed. Like those have been the pillars of who you guys are since you started.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like they like part of what your core values have to do is they have to allow growth, and they have to allow the ability to change, right? So, like 2 years ago, or I guess it was about 6, 7 years ago, there used to be a national center in Vancouver. So any kid that was over 15 just left our program and went to the national center. So personal excellence at that point was just getting kids to the national center. It's changed, became a regional center, and then they disappeared, and all the rest. Now our personal excellence within the club, or what I want to see with some of our kids, is going off to nationals. Right, like they're gonna win provincial level events at an elite level. Right, they're going to be able to compete at a national and international level, and which is cool. But if we had I don't know, I couldn't understand how you'd have another type of goal. Like it's hard for me to grasp because we've been living this for so long. But it's hard to grasp other people's goals. I do know, like one of the thing about the personal excellence that's allowed us to be, because it's a basic coaching philosophy of mine, is every kid's important. Like period. Like I know I talk to coaches and I know other coaches that or they talk, or athletes that come into our program talk about this as, programs are designed for that number one athlete, and they're kind of, I got my 20 swimmers, but one of them is the one that matters, and my swim program's designed around them, and everyone else is doing that program. And they're going to get faster, but at the end of the day, they're not the focus. That one is, and the way I describe it to my athletes is that may work in single sport things, and it probably works in triathlon too. I don't know. I don't like it, so I don't do it. But the way I sell it to my athletes of why, the whole program's not around our one or two athletes that are amazing, is the idea that in swimming, out of 20 kids, if you get one that goes on to an international, makes an international team or anything, your program's done. Like your program's set for life. Like you've accomplished everything, right? Whereas in triathlon, if I have a kid who's an international level runner or swimmer or cyclist, and we got a few kids that are in their one single discipline or two discipline are at that level, but they can't swim or they can't run or they can't bike, then they're not even in the race, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how far ahead you are on the bike and off the bike. If you can't run, you're not winning the race. So you have to have a bare minimum of running. So you can't just, and I rarely find kids that are truly good at all three. In fact, I can't think of any. They're usually good at one or two. So we can't ignore a kid. I can't go, well, they're not really good at the swimming. I'll just keep them on the program, and maybe they'll improve, maybe they won't. And we can't do. In my mind, I can't do that. I can't have a kid. My best cyclist, best runner is not a very good swimmer, but he's down to a 105 push from in practice for 100 free now, which is reasonable, right? We need him much faster, but he's moving, right? And had I given up on him because he can't kick and doesn't like it, had I given up on him about 2-3 years ago because he's not done one, he wouldn't even be close, right? So I don't know. It's just a different philosophy that way.
Yeah. Sorry, the audio just cut out there, so I just need you to repeat whatever you just said.
Oh, I was just kind of, I may have gone a little bit sideways on that one.
Oh, it's all right. I mean, like the way you describe things, like there's such like they are so complete. Like you cover everything from every angle, which is really, really good. I mean, what you just described in my mind is, um, well, I guess two parts of the statement. So it comes down to humility and being humble and having respect for all the athletes that come through your program. And you talked about other sports and other programs where like it might be a group, but really there's a singular focus or a focus on a small cohort of kids or people or whatever the case is. And many people get lost to the fringes. Kids get lost to the fringes, and it just you end up going through the motions rather than providing like a meaningful product, let's say.
Yeah.
And I think that offering or hearing you say what you say, I mean, like the value of running a program like that year after year means that kids can come in whatever state they come in, and they can leave in whatever state they choose to leave in, and get the full value of the program all along the way.
Yeah.
And like that is incredible. That is amazing. Right? Because they're not being cut off at their knees because they might not be the fastest at this or the best at that or whatever.
And that's important to us, right? Like they're all paying the same amount. They should get the same thing. Now, one of the, modern technology has helped, and we'll say engineering's helped, right? Like I've done computer programming, so I'm able to write. I use like online databases now, but I used to have an Access database. But I have databases that do all the number crunching for me, and we do use. Like, I spent a lot of years, especially in the early part, devising sets that would hit both my fastest guy and my least fastest guy, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not really like, and we get caught up in distance, but it's more time-based stuff, right? So like an example is, say we're getting ready for 100 freestyle. I want to do anaerobic. I view them as energy system areas. So I want to do anaerobic capacity. I want to do something between 20 and 40 seconds of hard effort, and I want to repeat that a whole bunch of times, right? So that's the actual set is 20 to 30 seconds. But in the water, you can't do that. So you've got to be able to go, okay, this group here is doing 50s, and this group here is doing 25s, and we may have a group that's actually doing 37 and a halves, or something like that, right? Or they're doing a series of 50s and 25s and 50s and 25s. So they're getting the balance there. So we'll often have, and like when we had, like right now, it's wonderful with COVID. We're paying through the roof for the pool, but it's wonderful because I have 3 kids per lane, and I have the whole pool, and I can easily go lane 1 is this set, and lane 2 is this set, lane 3. Whereas we've had it in the past where we've had 12 kids in a lane, and there's 4 different sets on the go. Right, different pace times, different this, because it really comes down to it, right? Like your energy system is your energy system. It's how long are you in that system, how many reps, and so duration of intensity, and then how much rest. So if you play with those, you can hit everybody. So that's how we set it up, and then of course certain different levels of athletes, I kind of pod them up, and okay, this group over here, they need to do more of this today, and this is my more developmental swim group, so they're doing more of this stuff, and then all the rest. So we do, you can't, nothing's ever 100% individual, but you can individualize it and give them their custom thing, right? You can bring in 6 colors of shirts, and they decide which shirt they really want to have. And you give the different shirts to people, right? So it's why you only have like small, medium, large, extra large shirts. So you're getting the gambit. It's not one size fits all. We got most sizes here. And then just for me, I make sure we have double XLs and stuff like that. So.
Well, good to hear. That's awesome. So I want to thank you for your time today. Like this has been like I always enjoy talking to you. Always very insightful, and whatnot. I mean, this has been like your program. Everything you're talking about is cloaked in humility, humbleness, and that's what I know about you. So where does Chris Hildebrand get that humility from? Because like you've always been that guy that always seeks to put I wouldn't say put everybody else first. That's not the right way to say it. I would say that can see, the way that things would work best for everybody is maybe a better way to say it.
I think it's funny because I've been told I don't have an ego, and I don't believe that because I have a large ego. And when I say that is like, like I want a club that is good and healthy and touchy feely and all the rest, and I want success. Like I want it all. I don't want just one little thing. I don't want, oh great. I've coached I had one athlete go on to the Olympics, like that I directly coached for a while. And what impressed me wasn't just that she went to the Olympics and she was a great athlete. She was a great person. I want it all, right? And but now the question is, and then this is the engineer in me, how do you get there? And, and I think part of it is like, you can say it's humble, but I think it's also an understanding of like no coach has ever revolutionized the sport. It's always an athlete, right? The Furby flop was not invented by a coach. It was done by somebody trying to get better, right? Given the fact that all of that's happening, you have to allow the athlete in there. You have to allow this stuff. And so I don't see it as humbleness. I don't see it as anti-ego or anything else. I see it as having such a large ego that I think I can do it all, or we can get all there. I realize I can't do it all. I need an amazing team. But I also realize where the real value is in coaching. Like at the end of the day, knowledge and content is a dime a dozen, right? Like you go online and you can learn how to swim, learn how to run better, learn how to this, do that. Programs, they're all over the place, right? Like they're everywhere. So if that's your value, if that's what you're doing, then it's not much there, right? Like, so where's your real value? What real value can I add? And as a coach, the only value I can add is helping your child grow, making a better person, making a better athlete, making a better triathlete. That's it. That's all. Helping direct, right? So given that, like you have to stay a little bit, I guess, use for a better word, you can call it humble, but I think it's just understanding where you are in the process, right? Understanding what your job is, what your job truly is. So, and if you do that, I think, I don't know, I think it's fine. I also realize, and I think that's the other aspect is, and I think we do an extremely poor job of this as a society or as a sport sport is, by the time, like, we've all known many athletes that have gone to the Olympics. We've all known many athletes that have succeeded at the highest level. And usually when they describe those athletes, like they only describe them as having a single coach, right? Like let's use Phelps as a good example, right? Like everyone generally knows he's had his one coach. I guarantee you that he actually had a team of coaches surrounding him. Like it wasn't just one coach. He had coaches from everywhere. He's probably about 50, 60, 70 different coaches that interacted with him over a span of 5 years leading up to his 8 gold medals. Easily. And yet, do we hear about them? Right? So it I don't know. Like I guess you can, and the people will brag about it, but and maybe that's just it. I don't believe in bragging. I don't believe in pumping yourself up. The people that matter, they know. The people that don't matter, they don't matter. Right? So my friends know, my wife knows, my kids know, my athletes know that I enjoy coaching them, and I think I'm a decent coach. They think I'm a decent coach, and they're the ones that matter. So.
I mean, that's brilliant, Chris. And you can call it whatever you want. I call it humility because that was that's what that was. And again, amazing program, great person, known Chris for a while. Kids loved this program, loved being part of the triathlon and so on and so forth. So before we go, when people want to find you, they want to find your club, what's the best way to do that?
Just acceleration. EXCELERATION.
So acceleration, like the Excel spreadsheet program. Acceleration. Got it.
Talking to my wife, Christine, the founder, she loves wordplay like that. So it's Excel and then oration. So,
well, that's awesome.
Or or if you type in Vancouver Triathlon Club, we're the largest, I think, in Canada. So we're around.
And if are you I'm not sure if it's going to happen this year, but if you have people, first timers in triathlon, that want to get out to your try, they would find all those details on your website as well.
On the website, it's looking like the triathlon's we're not going to be running the triathlon this year. It doesn't look like they're going to be running anything in Vancouver at the moment.
Yeah.
Book the pool. Maybe next year. 2022. So
fair enough. And going into, I guess we'll leave it here, but going into planning and whatnot, the Olympics being pushed back a year, that changes things for a lot of people, just in terms of how they look at things. From you being a cradle to grave, all skill levels, all abilities included. How does that change things for you?
For us, it wasn't really big.
Yeah.
Our athletes, my oldest athlete I'm working with is, I guess I got some 21, 22-year-olds that are just the kind of twilight of their career. They're coaching now and they just want to stay fit. But most of my athletes that are 17, they're 16 in that age category. So they're national level. The biggest thing that affects of it is not the Olympics, it's all the other races that have been canceled, right? Like a lot of my athletes they may not get to race this year. Like there's officially 3 races that are supposed to happen in Vancouver and BC, and they may not get to do them because they'd have to travel for them. So
well, it'd be interesting to pick up this conversation again in maybe 6 months' time and understand like how you've dealt with the COVID challenges, because that certainly would be challenging for anybody in any sport, because competition is a huge part of training. And to not have that, is severely limiting. So, but in any case, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot, Chris. Look forward to connecting again. And I highly recommend anybody in the Vancouver area or anywhere, reach out to Chris. He's a great guy. He runs a great program and has got lots of great advice to offer. So have an awesome day. And thanks again.
Will do. Thanks, Jason.